Chair, Charles Strauss, is on his way, but he's a little late, but we won't not let that delay us. So my name is Nick Redmond. I'm the Vice Chair. I will be presiding until Charles arrives. And just for the record, he'll be observing. He's on the phone now, but will not be voting. Jenny, our alternate, will be voting in his stead until he arrives. So welcome. The first thing we will do is review and approve the agenda. Hopefully everyone had a chance to see it online or see it in their email from us Planning Commission members. Are there any comments on the agenda from Planning Commission members? Any motions related to the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
All right, so Sarah moved, Jenny seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Great. Our motion's approved, or our agenda's approved. Next, we will review and approve, well, hopefully approve, the meeting minutes from both February 18th and March 17th. If you remember last meeting, there was some corrections to the February 18th meeting minutes. So those have been revised. And then, of course, we have our minutes from the March 17th, 2025 meeting. So any discussion from the Planning Commission on either agenda or either set of minutes?
Should we do them one at a time, or?
Sure. Why don't we start with the February 18th revised meeting minutes? So any discussion around the February 18th revised meeting minutes?
I'll make a motion to accept the February 18th, 2025 meeting minutes as presented.
I'll second.
Great. Sarah moved and Marty seconded. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right. The motion carries. Next up, we will look at the March 17th, 2025 meeting minutes from our last meeting. Any discussion before any motion?
I'll move to approve the March 17 meeting minutes.
Second.
All right. Marty moved and John seconded. Any discussion? All right. We'll vote. All those in favor of approving the March 17th meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Great. Motion carries. So first up on our agenda is public comment. A couple of things before we get started, or a few things. One, if you could just go up to the podium and say your name and your address before your comments. Two, we will be limiting these first set of public comments to items on the agenda. There's an additional set of public comments at the end for anything unrelated to the agenda. And then three, we'll see how this goes, but we might need to limit to 5 minutes per person. Just, I don't know how many of you are planning to speak, but we do want to keep track of that as well. And I will say, as Charles would say, we're more informal during the actual discussion when we get to those items on the agenda. So this first set is really just comments you'd like to make, but then we will have room for additional comments or questions as we get into the individual agenda items. But with that in mind, please head to the podium for public comment.
My name is Don Schmitz, and I represent Foursquare Church at 328 West Middle Street. We did not expect to make further comments, but since the commission asked for reconsideration of West Middle Street, we wanted to express our support for map options 2 and 3. I'll begin by saying we do appreciate all the hard work that the commission has done to bring us to this point. We appreciate that the commission gave careful consideration to the church's comments, and we understand why the commission decided to retain the church in the R2 zone. However, we believe the NC1 classification would better serve the interests of both the borough and the church. There were two basic issues we had with the R2 designation. One was the lack of definition of what constitutes a church, or what a church use is. And second, the disparate treatment between the church and what we saw as comparable properties in Kenny's and Rite Aid. In an R2 zone, the zoning ordinance permits churches without any limitation on use. Instead of the zoning ordinance, church uses are left dependent on the definition of an accessory use. As I read the zoning ordinance, there is a provision for accessory use, but it's rather limited. Instead, I believe we would be subject to the more general judicial doctrine of ancillary use, which permits a use that's accessory or incidental to the primary use of a property. The problem with that is there are inevitably going to be gray areas where something is not clearly a church use, but may be a church use. The church could not have a gas station or open a restaurant, but if it were to open a food service for low-income residents, is that permitted? The last thing that the church wants to do is be in a conflict situation with the borough. We don't like the ancillary use doctrine because there is no real definition. Who determines what a proper use is? Ultimately, it comes down to a court. We can cite court precedent, but in fairness, there are precedent on both sides of almost every use. We believe the NC1 does provide some definition of the types of uses that could be properly employed by a church. Whereas the open-ended accessory use definition under R2, we believe, is too general to permit proper enforcement. Second, we never really understood why the commission rejected the recommendation of the zoning task force to classify the church, Rite Aid, and High Street brews as commercial properties. It appears to be that the reason was that Gettysburg Foursquare Church was a church. We don't believe that's a proper distinguishing feature. What I would say, however, is the NC1 designation is an acceptable compromise. It doesn't bring the church up to a full commercial status, but does allow a wide range of activities that would encompass all the expected uses of the church. Therefore, the church supports either option 2 or option 3. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Sue Sipperly. I live at 314 North Stratton Street in Gettysburg, and I did send you some written comments because some of this was kind of technical. On the station project, I noted that in the agenda, there were 3 parcels listed as being considered, but there's actually, when you look at the application, there's 5 parcels that have work proposed on them. The proposed transit station parcel is not listed, and it is owned by the developer. On your maps, it's on the plans, it's shown as owned by the Industrial Development Agency. And then the SCAP property shows curbs and bike trail and is not mentioned anywhere in the application forms or plans. So that's just something that needs to be addressed. And on in the application that was with the packet, at least, the first page of the application is a sheet of information about the Transit Authority, 0.38 acre property where the existing transit station is. They're listed as the owner, and the developer is listed as the applicant. And then it states that the project includes additional lots owned by the applicant, which would be in a separate application. So those initial pages refer to the Transit Authority, but there was no sheet of information about the developer's properties. So something was missing. And then the proposed transit station, no new transit station structure has ever been shown on any plans or reviewed by HARB. One of the new drawings shows a 13 by 16 rectangle. The checklist says the project has been approved by HARB, but this part has not. The transit station with public restrooms is a requirement for the special exception that gave them 12 additional feet in height. On sewer plan, it's described as an employee bathroom. Perhaps that's an error in wording. The public restrooms would also be an amenity for the adjacent bike trail. And then another thing I noticed, and it may not be part of the completeness review, but the Streetscape Enhancement Overlay District doesn't allow mid-block curb cuts. So a variance may be needed for that. So, and I know there's also a traffic study underway, not currently available, and I guess we'll see that in the future. And the zoning part, there's some couple of sort of corrections on the maps on the Carlisle and Victory Street area, which I think they can just easily be fixed. The NC4 district could use some more uses. John Whitmore had put a column in the chart for NC4, and I added some in there that I thought would be appropriate for those buildings. And then I've suggested before that you might compare the revitalization district and Old Town uses on that chart and see if there's really that much difference between the uses. In fact, the revitalization has fewer opportunities that might be useful. For instance, a child care center is not allowed. If you had housing, that might be a good use. And government facilities are not allowed in the revitalization zone, but that seems appropriate. And drive-through restaurant is allowed in Old Town, but doesn't seem right for a downtown. And then just that question about the R1 dwelling, student housing is not on the chart for R1. Does that mean it's not allowed, or is this an oversight? So I can talk about that more when you get to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Christopher Narr with McNeese, Wallace & Nurek, here representing Gettysburg College. If you recall, we were here in February requesting some revisions to the draft zoning ordinance, and since that time there have been two drafts, the March draft and then this most recent April draft, and it looks like some of the requests that we were looking for in the area of the college properties were being addressed, and we appreciate that. And I want to specifically note that the 200 and 300 blocks of Carlisle Street is why we're here tonight. If you recall, in the March draft, that area was proposed to be zoned as part of the NC1 district, and that district permits student housing and a number of different dwelling types. So we were pleased to see that, and then we checked the draft ordinance that came out on Friday. and included a new zoning district created, and I think Ms. Sipperly addressed that, the NC4 district, which is the Carlisle Street Neighborhood Commercial District. And while that permits schools, which the college would be considered, and some residential and some non-residential, specifically, there are a number of there are a couple of uses that aren't permitted there that are currently there, specifically being student housing. In that area, the college owns 11 of the 17 properties, and if you include, and a number of those are student housing, and some of those are the former motels that were rehabilitated into student housing. If you include the college-affiliated properties, 2 of those being the fraternities, TEAC and Phi Sigma Kappa, that brings the number of properties in that area that are college-owned or college-affiliated to 77%. So that's a significant amount of one type of use in that area, or one group of use. And since the proposed draft of the zoning of the April draft doesn't permit the student housing in that district, it would, if it was adopted as it was drafted today, it would create a significant number of non-conforming uses in there. And understanding that municipalities, when they undertake a rewrite of their zoning ordinance, they want to recognize and recognize current uses and current development characteristics, but also they'd seek to eliminate or reduce the number of non-conforming conditions. And if the current ordinance as drafted in April would move forward as is without having student housing included in that NC4 district, it would create approximately 13 or possibly 13 non-conforming properties out of 17, so that's a significant amount. So we're here just to humbly request that the Borough Planning Commission consider at least including staff housing and student housing as uses permitted in the NC4 district if that's proposed to stay. And then we just suggested some other uses that might be complementary or compatible in that area, requesting consideration of brew pubs, drinking place, microbrewery, microdistillery, micro winery, and bed and breakfast in that area as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions, whether it comes up on the agenda or not. But we're able to provide you copies of our comments in writing. So if you have any other questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment? Okay. So we will move on. The next item on the agenda is tabled old business, but we have no tabled old business, so we will move to number 6, which is new business. The first item on new business is SLD 240003, Gettysburg Station / 108 North Stratton Street. So we are looking at today a review of the application for acceptance for a preliminary subdivision and land development plan for 108 North Stratton Street and with the parcels listed. Just as a reminder, because I had to remind myself, or John had to remind me after I asked him, that today we are initially accepting this for review. And so there might be questions from the public, there might be questions from the Planning Commission, but an approval today does not mean a general approval of the plan as presented. So I think just important to keep that in mind. We're happy to discuss it, but this is not the final approval. So with that said, I'll invite members of the Planning Commission first to offer comment on this agenda item.
I was actually going to ask maybe if we could start with John.
Chad and John
maybe
first.
to
Yeah, that's fair. Chad, it looks like you have some
introduction.
comments.
Yeah, and I think you hit the big ticket item. This is just an acceptance of the plan. All we're doing is accepting the plan. They've met the criteria for acceptance. They've paid the fees. They have a complete plan. Those kind of things. This just authorizes the borough to distribute it to its consultants to start doing the review. So I'll start doing my review. I haven't started reviewing yet. Same thing with the municipal authority will do a review, the fire chief will do a review, and then we'll come back. This initiates the 90-day requirement from the municipality's planning code, that at the end of those 90 days, we have to make a decision to either approve, deny, or get a time extension. I will anticipate that this development will last all 90 days, if not more, until we get through some other outside agencies. There's PennDOT approvals associated with this, County Conservation District approvals with this. Those kind of things are probably the things that will be the critical path here that will take the longest. So again, this is just to start the review. I heard in the public comments that there is a traffic impact study also going on. That actually started almost a year ago. That process is one of the first things you start. The developer did the appropriate things of making sure that there wasn't going to be any major hurdles that you just can't overcome with traffic, because that can sometimes just stop a project in its tracks. So we have been talking with PennDOT for quite some time. And that kind of, it goes down a separate paralleling path. We wouldn't approve the land development without traffic impact, but there is a whole separate process that goes through PennDOT with the traffic impact study. So I will say that. And just one thing real high level in the traffic impact study that I think it's important for the general public as they're looking at this thing over the next couple of months is that this development in the big scheme of things is not a heavy hitter. And some people might not agree to that, but it's not a heavy hitter in terms of the traffic impact. We know that the square sometimes gets congested. It's just funny, in most developments that we deal with, the traffic impact is on your weekday peak hours when you're going to work or home from work. And Gettysburg is different. It's Saturday afternoon, right? It's tourist season. That's whenever the square in Gettysburg gets congested. Right now, our square is operating around a level C. We look at traffic as just like you would in school, right? A, B, C, D, E, and F is the failures. Everything up through A through D, PennDOT will pass. So our circle is operating right around a level C. By the year 2031, even without this development, it drops to an E or an F. So that's a concern right off the bat from PennDOT's. But it's not because of this development. It's mainly because of all of the other development that's happening north of Gettysburg, outside of Gettysburg. We have 5 different developments that are included in the traffic impact study that significantly outweigh this. This has maybe close to 200 trips for that peak hour. Those are thousands of trips, right? All of Route 30 is 15,000 trips, right? So it's a significantly different. It seems like a big development to us, but in the big scheme of things, it's really not. So I just wanted to make sure that that's said right off the bat before we get too far down the path of being concerned about what's happening with a separate ongoing traffic impact study with PennDOT. PennDOT's going to have to get an HOP from PennDOT, so they got to get approval from PennDOT. They're going to review this just like everybody else's, but from my perspective, I just want to give you those high level, kind of off the cuff remarks.
I wanted to, I heard
I was just going to pick up where Chad left off, and you stole my thunder, in part. I would just note, and you folks know this already, it's not uncommon for you to request time extensions from developers for projects simple and complex, and for those to routinely be granted. So it would not be out of the ordinary for this to take longer than 90 days for your review and ultimate decision relative to this plan to be meted out.
Do you have anything, John? Good.
The only thing that we will add, the applicant has identified the need for a modification as it relates to landscaping. There are a few other items that staff has just, initially we're discussing some changes with the development team. One of the things we want to make sure the public is aware of is that there are some limitations with the subdivision and land development ordinance as it relates to the ability for reviews to occur. So a lot of the architectural features for the building, that's already been reviewed by HARB. When it comes to the site design and things like that, it really is kind of black and white the way the ordinance works as it relates to land development. So it's one of those things where I just wanted to make everyone aware of that and cognizant of before we actually delve into the plan in depth, because it is a very large plan. It is, as Chad noted, it's it's significant for the borough, and it's something that we want to make sure that we're giving it due process that's requested of us from not only the residents, but everyone that's coming to the borough. So that's where we are.
Right, thanks, Sean.
I wanted to, since the documents that we received started with the application page, I wanted to start there, and I was going to repeat what Sue asked also, which is I was confused initially, or still am confused, by the fact that the application sheet it seems to say that it's just referencing the transit center lot, and that there will be separate applications for the other lots. And I'm not sure if there's a lot of pages in here.
I
but-
noticed the same inconsistency. It's the same thing in the traffic impact study. So yeah, that'll be something that we'll be wanting to make sure. At this point, it appears to me that the application that's on the table includes the transit center on the east side of Stratton Street. Even though it's not listed in your agenda, that parcel isn't listed there. I don't know that necessarily matters. The plan that we have shows the new transit center on the east side of Stratton Street.
So this plan, or this submission, is actually for all of the parcels owned by 501 Richardson. It's not
Correct.
just for the transit. Okay. So
Correct.
This is
Yep. Yeah, and that's something that I noticed the same. It's just I think there's a label that they got. It got carried over from the traffic impact study.
Oh, okay.
And then it just never got deleted. I think it's just an inconsistency in a typo type of thing.
Okay. I had a couple of questions about the checklist for things that are submitted, because I was just curious about what is required or not, and I guess I should look at my notes so I can remember what I'm asking here, but, so one of the things that was, they didn't include, which were shown as not applicable, were road plan profiles. When are those required, or what kind of projects are those required for?
So, and that may be something that I actually may ask for some profiles, specifically when it comes to utilities, and make sure there's not going to be utility conflicts. Road plan profiles specifically are whenever they're building a new road that's going to be dedicated to the borough. In this case, there's a road there, but it's not going to be dedicated to the borough. And I'm make sure. And Tim's here tonight. You want to make sure that I'm confirming what I'm saying here. But from what I understand is that's not to be it's not to be dedicated to the borough. It's not like Lefevre Street. Whenever the middle school came in, they had to have road plan profiles of the whole street. It's a profile of the street, cross section of the street essentially. That was to be dedicated to the borough, and we did require, like I said, still may ask for some profiles just to show that utilities aren't going to create any conflicts, but we don't necessarily need the full road.
So the fact that, Foth Alley, or whatever it's going to be called, going all the way through, will not be dedicated to the borough. Is that a matter that we should be considering in this?
It
or
should be, yes.
Okay. And
good question.
at what point do we want to consider that, or what that means, or what the benefits or negative aspects might be of that?
Yeah, and actually that came up in some of the planning meetings with the developers team, because currently we use that, for snow plows to be able to get through. So we don't want to have our snow plows coming up the alley and having to do a dead-end turnaround. So there's going to have to be an agreement to be able to make sure that our municipal trucks, trash trucks, those kind of things can still get through. Not tonight, but yes, in the next coming meetings over the next couple of months, that'll be something that certainly we're going to have a discussion on. I anticipate some type of an easement agreement between the borough and the developer to make sure that municipal vehicles can continue to go through without being considered trespassing.
Okay, so a topic to be considered again. And so the only question I had about the checklist was, or I think it was in the application, was that it said a list of modifications or waivers was provided, and I don't know where to find that. I'm trying to remember where that was, where I saw that exactly. Oh, yeah, maybe it's the very last page. Number 8.
Page 526 of the packet includes the request from the developer.
And what is the maximum number of pages you would send us for a meeting?
945 to
946.
You said 526?
Yeah, I see
yes.
it here.
Great. Oh, okay, so this is, okay.
Yeah, right there. good?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Hey, jump in.
Do you want to, should we just finish up this agenda? item,
Welcome.
Gabby? Okay. My personal comments, I think thank you for the application. I think we have a minimum of 2 or 3 meetings dedicated, that we can discuss this application without even considering an extension, so I'm going to reserve my comments for those meetings, just considering I think we're going to have a long discussion on rezoning in the next agenda item. So personally, I'm okay. But any other planning commission
one.
member comments?
First, I wanted to apologize to the Planning Commission and the room. I was traveling back from a family vacation in North Carolina, and the trip just took longer than we anticipated. So, but I'm here, and I was listening. So Mike and Nick, you're going to stay chairing for a while. Is that okay?
I figured just this agenda item, since we're in the middle of it.
Okay, all right. I heard you say, Chad, that this would require a motion to accept for review. So what we're discussing here is just what may or may not be on there that would make it complete. And are you suggesting that you deem this as complete?
Yes, both John and I have looked at the
Okay.
application.
And you say it's
This would
complete.
be considered a complete application.
When we've done this in the past, we have taken this as a moment to just ask any questions about completeness that might be helpful to the applicant. So that's what I have a couple questions related to that. Okay. So the first one, and there are 4 questions, and the first one relates to this question about the titling of it. And I think for just my clarity, we're talking about one development, but 5 parcels or 4 parcels?
So the application that staff utilized for this submittal just indicated the 103 Carlisle, 102, and 108 North Stratton Street, primarily just the parcels associated with the physical building construction. The transit center parcel, portions of the parcel are shown as having development associated with this SLD plan. That's something that came up in this, our very initial review, especially as the one application notes that the checklist says that it has HARB review.
Right.
It doesn't. The applicant's aware of that. It's just the thing is who is going to actually be building the transit center? Is that going to be a portion of this development? That might be something, well, it will be something we're going to be getting finalized with the Planning Commission and definitely on the plat that's recorded.
Okay.
But it's just not something that, it's, as it relates to the 5 parcels going forward, yes, we can include all of those, but the reason they were listed in the agenda tonight was this from the application.
Okay. So that helps, and this is a first one, I think, for me and probably for some of us, that in order for one parcel to be developed, it has to first be approved and sold, and then, I'm talking about the transit center, for that all to be finalized, the building has to be purchased, right? And currently the site has to be purchased, and currently that site is not owned by the developer.
You mean with regards to the transit?
The
center?
proposed transit center site,
Okay.
which I think,
Well, that is. It's
that one
the,
is, okay.
It's the existing that wouldn't be owned by.
Oh, yeah, the existing, I'm sorry. So for that to be put into the entire development, the first has to be constructed. Or maybe,
You lost me a little bit.
okay. So there are 3 properties owned by Richardson Acquisition. And then there's 1 property owned by the transit center. Eventually, though, they will all be part of the same development, but there are steps preceding that. And so when the plan is finalized, will that have to have all of those steps accomplished first?
I don't want to speak for the developer and what their intentions are in terms of chronology or timing on this. I mean, you're wondering if they're capable of submitting an application and a land development plan for property that they don't own and don't have under
Well, I
contract?
think, I believe they are capable. I'm just suggesting this is a new one, and are there any parts of that that should be on our radars here as we navigate it? That we're seeing a plan for a set of properties that aren't all owned by the same developer? by the same applicant.
Well, it's not uncommon for properties to have land development applications pending approval, various things happening to them.
Okay.
And maybe try to say this without confusing matters even more, but there is, so the plan is titled a Preliminary Subdivision and Land Development Plan. In our ordinance, we have stipulations for preliminary versus final plans, and that's only for the subdivision component. So there's a land development plan is never a preliminary or final, it's just a land development plan. It's the subdivision component. So this is a preliminary subdivision. So this doesn't really complete the subdivision component. Okay. This just allows them to have approval of this land development component. Then they're going to have to separately provide us with a final subdivision plan, and essentially they can't complete they can't start any of the construction until the subdivision component of this is complete. There's a bit of a chicken and egg thing with that, but yeah, the end game here is for 2 lots to be created out of this. Everything west of Stratton Street will be consolidated into 1 lot, even though it's right now 4 different lots. And then you still have the separate tract on the east side of Stratton Street, which is going to be the transit authority. So at the end of this, there won't be 4 or 5 lots, it'll just be those 2. Okay. But you have to go through that preliminary versus final subdivision stage in order to be able for things to make sense.
You answered the question better than I phrased it, so thank you. Because I did note on the plan also the removal of lot lines and wondered when in the process that actually takes place.
It's technically not until, they show what they intend to remove with the preliminary subdivision and land development plan, and then it's the final subdivision that actually eliminates does those consolidations.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then my second question is about I went back and read the July 2023 zoning hearing board decision because it's referred to in the application. When in the process do we note, if we do, that there would be any changes in the plan as it was submitted for that application and the plan that we have seen for the first time today? Or I think that's in your responsibility to note for us, but if, as we were reviewing it, we want some more clarity about whether this is still in the plan, when would we do that? Before we accept the plan for review or during the review process?
I guess my question would be to the solicitor, would they be in a position where they're reviewing the zoning hearing board's decisions?
Well, you're taking, this received zoning approval in general. I'm not familiar off the top of my head with what that decision said exactly, but you're looking at a land development plan here that you have a recommendation essentially from your staff to accept. You're not in a position, in my opinion, to reject it on the basis that you think it falls outside of the zoning hearing board's decision.
Okay.
I mean, to not accept it and begin this process.
Okay.
That this is not the time to apply what the zoning hearing board's written decision was and say, well, this deviates from it.
Okay, that's all. I just wanted to be sure that when we accept for review, are we saying that we're accepting a plan that meets that follows the decision of the zoning hearing board? Is that what we're saying? Or if at a later time we want to raise that concern, are we able to?
Well, the development of this property received zoning approval close to 2 years ago. Now you're looking at a subdivision land development end of things.
I guess, yeah, I had a similar question to this, and I think part of it was created because of Sue's comments, where she points out that the transit center does not seem to include public restrooms, which was one of the criteria for the zoning. Is that not right? Is that?
For the additional
The
height?
additional height. So it seems like that matter would maybe want to be settled before they start getting into the plan review process.
Mm-hmm. Well, that
my
would be
question.
fleshed out. I mean,
Yeah.
Either way, I think to answer your question, accepting the plan for review isn't necessarily approving anything.
exactly.
Right, it's just accepting it for review, simple as
So
that.
Does it have, to perhaps boil it down a bit too much, do you have the necessary number of copies of things? Do you have the,
Right.
do you have the information that you need to have relative to, road profiles when appropriate? Do you have the right number of, whatever? Is the correct information shown on the plan provided by their engineer. It's that sort of thing that you're looking at tonight to determine whether or not it meets the criteria under the saldo to accept it and begin this process.
Yes, the one thing that I've seen in years past, the reasons why somebody didn't accept it is that they didn't pay the application fee.
Exactly.
It's the simple thing, right? We're just really high level.
That's also very helpful. Thank you, all three of you. But I think when we have gone through this before, we've thought that anything that the Planning Commission can offer an applicant as they move through the process as early as possible, the better. So I think maybe that's why, at least I'm trying to offer these things now, if it changes anything going forward in plan review, submission or review. And so just in noting that the saldo requires the Planning Commission to ensure that that the plan meets any decisions made by the Zoning Hearing Board. I just wanted to raise that, as I'm reading it, I have questions about that.
Sure.
So that's all I was doing with that question. And then I think I had two other questions, but I think that those now seem to be more things that we'll deal with in the actual review process. I did note, though, could you say again, John, I was just coming into the room when you were saying this, 5 waiver requests on the front, and you mentioned something about working with landscape. Can you just repeat what you said? I just didn't hear it related to those waivers. I did want to note that it seems like if you read the Zoning Hearing Board decision from July 2023, at least one of their requirements in that decision, but we haven't discussed this, relates to landscaping. So I wondered if there's already a conflict between a waiver request and not just the ordinance itself, but the Zoning Hearing Board decision.
Okay, so with regards to, I guess these are the requests by the developer. These specifically deal with plantings for location as they relate to the parking structure. So these are identified on pages 526 and 527. Specifically, in speaking with the development team, my understanding is waivers are being requested as a result of lower levels of the deck, being able to provide plantings, landscaping materials around the parking areas that are, I wouldn't say subterranean, but they are going to have a shadowed effect. It's not, that's what they're requesting, as opposed to what staff believes was provided for the variance and special exceptions associated with this project by the Zoning Hearing Board.
Okay, thank you.
Since I obviously didn't, I think I did see these pages before, but because they were just regarding landscaping, I didn't think this would have been the list of waivers I was referencing previously. Which plan is it? Maybe the general plan page included mentions a waiver being needed for the transit center height, but that's not being submitted yet, or doesn't need to be submitted yet?
So that's
Or
something
variance,
we're
I
going to be
guess.
discussing with the applicant.
Okay.
The transit center, because we need to establish if the transit center, how that's going to be developed, if it's going to be a project by the transit center, how that'll actually be facilitated. So the components of the Zoning Hearing Board decision that deal with the transit center, so like the building height, that was the one of the variances. That's something that's going to be a review criteria for that specific development. But at this time, my understanding is the developer is not proposing to build a structure on that site and is working with the transit center, but we'll be able to flesh that out in the coming months.
Okay, so the only waivers then, as you're showing there, are relating to landscaping?
Yes.
Okay. Should we take an opportunity to hear from the applicant?
Can I have a
Or
follow-up
before
to
you-
that? Yeah. Fine.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say it another time and see, John, if you have a reaction, and if not, then move forward, because I trust what you and Chad and Adam are saying. But given that the whole plan is predicated on some significant height exceptions using 2 incentives, I just want to make sure that we're not missing a point here that relates to what if the plan as we're seeing it now, which is the first land development plan we've seen, versus what the Zoning Hearing Board saw and what HARB saw, doesn't change in a significant way what can be achieved here. And if you're saying, no, that's not the time for it, then I understand. But it seems like it would be a big mistake if we didn't at least address that straight on. And I think I'll just be more clear. It does relate to what I'm seeing and what you just described as the plan for the transit center, which is different from the language of the minutes in the zoning hearing board decision.
So with regards to the review by the planning commission, it's related to this subdivision land development plan. If that's, we can provide you with that information, and the solicitor will be able to advise on if you're making a determination with findings of fact that are based upon the criteria of review for a subdivision land development plan. That wasn't included with this, as this is just making sure the application is prepared for your review. Yeah, so if that's something that the planning commission would like some additional materials as they relate to prior, well, we can provide the, HARB and zoning hearing board materials in addition to prior project information to provide for a full case file.
No, I appreciate that. I was just using the HARB, or the zoning hearing board minutes and reading what the motions were at that meeting and recognizing that they don't seem to match, at least in my review of this, what I'm seeing in this plan at the moment.
So let me say it like this, because I think you have a valid point in that, if you're the developer, you wouldn't want to put a lot of time and money into going through months and months of reviews to find out at the end that they have a zoning violation and it's all for nothing, right? I think it's in their best interest to make sure that those things line up. But and I say it like this, a lot of times, and in this case, I've seen parts of this development over the past couple of months because I've been working on the traffic impact study, those kind of things. But there's very often, back in the paper days, whenever an applicant would come, hand you a roll of paper, and then they would hand it to me at the meeting. That'd be the first time I ever even heard about this development or knew about this development. I'm getting handed a roll of paper and said, yep, here we go, we're accepting this thing for review. So we wouldn't know those kind of things until you get into the second, third month, right? So I think it's really, it's a suggestion that I think is valid. Your point's valid, that you don't want to get too far into this review process. We don't want to still be talking about this 3 or 4 months from now and not have addressed that. But at least probably by that first or second month, if there's a big ticket item like that, we want to flush those things out right away.
That's really helpful.
I know of municipalities that don't even accept plans. It's just if they come in and the zoning officer has them passed across the desk, they're deemed accepted.
Okay, well.
This is a ministerial action this evening, essentially.
Okay. That's very helpful. And just so it's clear, I did think of this concern in December and raised it, and the response was to do it now. So, but now I'm getting that it's actually not now, but
yeah, next month.
And what all of you have said makes me feel better, especially how you just concluded things. I just, in the interest of total transparency of looking at this and reacting to it with the applicant in the room, wanted to share these things right now. So that's all I had, Nick.
Great. Any additional comment from Planning Commission members?
I'd like to thank Mr. Harrison for submitting a project, a serious project. It's the first serious submittal I've seen for our historic brownfield there. I thought I would die before we'd see something, so thank you for doing that. I also wanted to say we're very fortunate here to have a very strong landscape ordinance. I know you have a couple of waivers there. But given the scope of the project, I think our landscape ordinance becomes paramount, becomes very important. Most of the reviews that I sort of do on my own regard landscaping, so I'll be looking at that closely and hopefully working with you. And again, I'm excited and wish you the best of luck through this process and want to thank you.
Great, yeah, and I think as it's been clear, hopefully members of the public here understand that point, that this is not the only review we will have. So if you have comment, if you know your friends have comment, whomever it is, we will continue to discuss this at our next 2 to 3 to potentially more meetings. So please take a look at the application and come with your comments then. But with that in mind, do we have any motions related to the initial acceptance of this application?
I'll move to accept the application of the Gettysburg Station project
Second.
for review.
Great. And I guess potentially a point, Charles, if you're all right, maybe just not voting on this one, and then we'll kind of switch after. Any other discussion before we vote? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great. We accepted the for review. At this point, I think it's clear, Charles, our chair, is here, so I'll kind of turn that over to Charles, and I think for Jenny, we'll become our alternate member again, and Charles will continue to vote. We can try to move this thing over. It's very heavy.
All right, thank you,
If
Nick.
you want to come carry it afterwards, it's very large.
Weightlifting?
I don't have ownership over this chair. You can take it again if you want.
This is closer to the power cord for the computers. So.
All right. So it does seem like there are a number here for this next item related to rezoning. And I know that we have a very targeted set of items that John has laid out for us. Before we get to those, I did want to say a few items, of course, in the way of history, because we're nearing passing this off of our desks, at least for the moment, to that of the Borough Council. What I have done throughout this process is to try to follow carefully how Director Whitmore reports on what we do here to the Borough Council. So I, like maybe many on the Planning Commission, do watch all the council meetings and sometimes attend them, and have been very grateful for community media for filming them, and for those residents who have paid for community media to film our Planning Commission meetings, and hopefully the Borough Council watches those as well. I was surprised, which is why I just want to begin here and maybe address something that was brought up at the last meeting and then printed in the newspaper. And I do this as the chair of this commission and feeling somewhat responsible for how the commission is discussed in the wider public. And these were comments that our Borough Council President, Matt Moon, made, and so it would be perfectly acceptable for a response to that, maybe in public comment without any interruption or not. But it's just a very light thing that I hope maybe corrects the record or at least adds something to it. And I read and heard the comments as enthusiasm for moving this project to conclusion, because we have been working on rezoning for quite a long time, and I believe that the Borough Council shares with the Planning Commission enthusiasm for moving this a little farther down the road. But the comments made were suggesting that the Planning Commission has taken longer than the quote was reasonably expected to. And there was another quote that suggested that we were told to spend 3 to 6 months reviewing the prepared ordinance that a committee that was guided by the consultant Michael Baker International created. My memory of this experience was that we were given no timetable, but we're told to follow what the Pennsylvania Municipal Planning Code tells the Planning Commission to do, which is to make recommendations to the Borough Council for rezoning, especially if asked to do that by the Borough Council. When this was done last time, it wasn't a complete repeal and replace in 2008, but it was a substantial change. And I read the minutes from that year, and it took about a year for the Planning Commission to work with the developer, to work with a consultant to complete a substantial proposal for a zoning change. Now, the difference with the process this time was that the Borough Council elected to hire a consultant and have a appointed committee manage that first. And so that took about 10 months, and then Planning Commission got it. And I'll say, and this is where I'll stop, I believe that the group has worked really hard and without waste to listen to public concern, to work with our very talented planning director, as well as the expertise that we receive from our solicitor and engineer, to produce what we may recommend to our Borough Council as a zoning ordinance today. And I don't think it could have taken any month shorter. I do think we learned things in the process, and we made changes to things even after we had thought we had made our mind up earlier, but that was all part of the process. So I don't want to make this go on any longer than it has to, but I did think it should be corrected that this planning commission has taken their job seriously, and if there was a timetable placed on it, we were not aware of it, and that we're looking forward to working with council now as council makes the ultimate decision on it. The other bit of history that I would say is that John Whitmore has, as he's done after each of our meetings, either produced a brand-new draft of it and a map and put it online, or there was one or two where it took a while as we had multiple meetings. So that has been up since Friday, and he's also set out on the agenda for an order of how we'll approach these decisions. So I'd like now to turn it to John to tell us what order you had in mind, and then we can respond and move to a vote.
Okay, so to begin, we've been given a direction to provide Borough Council a draft, that recommendation by the, May 26th workshop meeting of the Borough Council. That's something that staff is going to recommend that if we can't have a positive outcome this evening, we would go to a 2-week schedule, in which case we would have another meeting on May 5th, if that's acceptable, just so that we can provide council with this information so that they can establish the next course of action with regards to this. With the updated districts and updated zoning map, in terms of the updated districts, excuse me, changes from, I'll just go to the map, changes from the last meeting. Excuse me, where is this? So prior, we had an NC1 along Carlisle Street. There was an issue. We did not have options for the NC1 along Middle Street. That has been provided. What we've also done is the establishment of an NC4 district, and I'm clicking and it's making boxes appear. As such, we're providing you with a few different zoning maps. We'll get to that a little bit later. But in terms of the new districts, this NC4, what staff has termed the Carlisle Street Neighborhood Commercial District, the specific design criteria for the district only relates primarily to the R2 district as the basis. This was as discussed last meeting. So with that, there we go. You'll see the design height is just taken verbatim from R2. The criteria for the purpose of the district, staff has provided that the purpose of the NC4 district is to provide for the development of the 200 to 300 blocks of Carlisle Street and Paxton Hall as a residential transition zone from Gettysburg College properties to residential neighborhoods. In terms of use regulations, what we started with, what staff started with, is the R2 general uses. Now, we didn't include student housing, and that's something, I mean, if the planning commission's acceptable for that change, that would be something where we could easily put it as a special exception or as a permitted by right. So that would be the student housing, student internet housing, let me get this right, dwelling, student housing, institutional. And we then also, I believe there was a request from the college for staff housing. One thing we did include, just put in there, was the special exception for multifamily conversion. That is a change from the R2. So it's something we could also put as a permitted by right. In looking at the commercial uses, we specifically wanted to avoid high-impact commercial activities, so like retail sales. As such, lodging use was limited to the motel as it related to those historic structures in that area that are designed as motels and that can be utilized potentially again as a motel use. It's a very specific lodging type of use. The other NC4, we allowed for library, museum, public schools, and then some additional commercial opportunities for, where are they? Convenience stores, a special exception, eating place without a drive-through, a special exception, event venue, special exception, and general commercial service uses, and that's the whole gamut of different types of retail activities. Permitting those as special exception, we could provide additional guidance for those in the special exception provisions, but primarily my understanding as the direction from Planning Commission was to preserve the structures, preserve the uses by the college in that transitional area, and allow for some commercial, but by all means, if we can discuss some additional opportunities for this district. So I'll stop now and turn it back over to the commission.
Okay, so thank you for that. Let's try to group what you just shared with us, and let's start with this last thing, which is NC4 uses.
Yeah.
So let's move to consensus, if possible, on the uses that were just listed there, and any corrections or additions we want to make to them.
If I can start, Charles, I definitely appreciate the college's comments, and I also saw kind of some of the housing uses as interesting. From my perspective and from the history of these meetings, NC4 came out of a desire to take a look at Carlisle Street, realize that the R2 district was a little bit too controlled and too exclusionary of commercial uses, yet some of the neighborhood commercial existing zones were too permissive of commercial uses. And so really it was just kind of this idea of it's residential now, can we allow a few more commercial uses? And so for me, I don't see why we wouldn't just kind of copy and paste the R2 residential uses into NC4, because I mean, for most of the process of this, we've had it in R2, which allows, you know, a lot more residential uses. And it was really just, again, that conversation of can we get a little bit of commercial use in there as well? And so I personally would be in favor of, you know, maybe other people have different thoughts, but to me, it seems easiest just to take R2's residential uses and just make them, you know, the same residential uses for NC4. And just as a reminder to kind of the public special exception and to the college really is it is allowed. It just means there's additional kind of hearings involved when that use is being applied for, but it does not exclude the use at all, special exception. I think it's misleading name special exception because it doesn't really need a special exception. It just needs more attention. So really special exception is still allowing that use. So again, I would just recommend we copy some uses from R2 for residential.
Okay, let's stay on that. Reactions to what Nick just said. Would you mind, John, putting the purpose statement of the NC4 back up, please, for a second? Can anyone recall, as he's doing that, our discussions related to this and why we might have not done that?
So the purpose, staff placed it as the purpose of the NC4 district is to provide for the development of the 200 and 300 blocks of Carlisle Street and Paxton Hall as a residential transition zone from Gettysburg College properties to residential neighborhoods.
Thanks. Certainly doesn't preclude having more residential uses in the NC4.
I mean, staff made it more restrictive based on prior conversations we had regarding the R1 and R2 districts around the college and the potential for, how do I put this? The potential for, I believe we had the conversation about the frat, the proto-frats and whatnot we had. So just avoiding a situation where there would be student housing uses that were not necessarily compatible with the surrounding area. So that was where we were. By all means, though, going to the full R2 would not be a problem.
And if you don't mind, put the chart back up now so we can compare. And it would be good for maybe the room to note the differences between R1, R2, and this NC4 district. I think there's probably still questions about what's permissible in the R1 as far as housing goes.
Okay. Okay, so really, as it affects the difference between R1 and R2, it comes down to things like multifamily dwellings and the ability to have the student housing types. Additionally, that's where the only manufactured home community provisions are in the R2 district to at least enable the use to occur. Otherwise, yeah, the community residence sober living facilities is not permitted in the R1, but is permitted in the R2.
I like Nick's idea of just kind of copying and pasting the R2 column to NC4 when it comes to the residential uses, but I guess I was just curious about, since you were talking about the special exception versus by right, when it comes to the student housing or student housing institutional, if any of those you think should be by right, or you still think that special exception is the correct approach for those?
I think my personal feelings would be by right. I think Gettysburg is a college town, and particularly if you're living on Carlisle Street in the 200-300 block, you should not be surprised to be living next to students. But I think from obviously a lot of the conversations we've had in the past months, there is a lot of concern from the community in terms of student housing, particularly large student housing, and I think dwelling student housing institutional would be housing the college provides that is owned by them and is run by them, and then dwelling student housing would be more of that fraternity style housing where these are college students. There's still a connection to the institution, but it is owned and operated by a fraternity or sorority or something like that. And so I do understand concern there, and I think special exception is a good medium, right? There's from my understanding of what we've talked about in previous meetings, there would be nothing that would prevent anyone from exercising their right to have student housing in R2 or NC4. It would just require some notice and some conversation with the community, which I think I'm never, opposed to, right, allowing community input. But again, with the understanding that we're talking about the college a lot, but really anyone within that area would have the right to have student housing. Again, with just potentially some additional restrictions, but really limited to kind of public, really safety and health measures that we would need to add. And so I don't see SC as being super restrictive personally, but I see it as a response to just some of the conversations we've had with the public at these meetings around college housing and allowing them to have their voice heard if, a property that was not previously student housing is now becoming student housing and being able to share their concerns. I think, again, I'm always in favor of that.
So it sounds like we have a proposal for special exception for NC4, including all of the residential uses from R2.
Is that what you were saying?
Again, I mean, from our history, this came out of kind of trying to be a little bit more, allowing more commercial uses in an area that was deemed R2. So in my mind, it makes sense to at least allow all of the R2 allowing for residential. And then really the difference just becomes how many commercial uses do we want to allow in NC4? So yeah, I would be in favor of just taking the R2 uses and moving them over to NC4.
Can you scroll up just a little so we see the R2 there?
It's the third column.
NC4, R2.
So are there any, is there anyone who objects to that?
John, do you see any major problems with that?
No.
Without objection, then we make that recommendation, noting the special exception as it's listed there for student housing. Okay, then what else was in that list? I was not.
I have a question.
Just real quick, you're only talking about the residential.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to
For
the
right now.
commercial.
No,
Oh, right.
we haven't yet.
I think we're going to get into those.
We will.
The commercial, were you making a similar suggestion related to commercial?
No, sorry, my suggestion was just on residential
Okay.
for R2.
Are
I
there
think we
any
can examine commercial.
changes to the commercial uses in the NC4 district? Yeah, go ahead.
The chart I did.
We have it. I think you sent it to us. We can.
Yeah, we have it.
We have it.
You haven't discussed it. And Carlisle Street traditionally has been college-owned properties that are great for, like, you didn't say they could have a community residence or super living facility in NC4, but you said it could be in R2. I think there's more appropriate buildings on Carlisle Street, for one thing. And then down with staff housing, you didn't put that in NC4 at all. I think that should be by right.
Well, Sue, we're suggesting right now, what we just came to a consensus on is that we take
Oh, the
the
R2.
R2 column
Okay.
and
'cause-
make the NC4 just for residential uses, well, that's all we're talking about right now, a copy of R2. So anything, R2, the way R2 is saying, so special exception for community residence, sober living, by right for staff housing, those would also be in NC4.
So do you have anything specific, Sue, on commercial, but we want to move on to make our decision related to commercial use?
You mean like bed and breakfast?
Yeah, we don't see anything
On my chart.
Yeah,
Yeah,
by right.
Under
that's right.
lodging uses, which is.
Okay, we'll make sure to address that now. Thank you.
Because it's a special set
Right.
of buildings that are very adaptable to a lot of different uses.
Okay, thank you. So Ms. Sibley reminds us of this chart that was part of her public comment, but anything related to that chart or any other suggestion on NC4 commercial uses? Convenience store, perhaps by special exception, long-term care facility by special exception.
And we also got I think you missed this part.
Okay.
You were listening to the phone, but we have a list from the college about some additional commercial uses they're proposing, brew pub, drinking place, all these micro things.
Oh, I did hear
Also
that,
bed and breakfast.
yes.
So yes, I think we should address those also.
Okay, let's go through then, starting with convenience store. Are there any objections to adding convenience store by special exception to the NC4?
Oh, sorry, can we, just start with lodging, since that was, have we done lodging yet?
Oh, okay.
So
Where's lodging?
Oh, I was just
Lodging's
doing
right underneath
commercial.
residential, so
Oh, I
it's-
see,
yeah.
thank you.
I see.
Like the category.
Okay, so if you could look at the lodging, NC4, are there any additions that that you would like to make or removals of uses for lodging, NC4?
So just to point out what Sue's specific comment or suggestions were bed and breakfast by right, community residence, halfway house, special exception, and inn by special exception. Those were the changes.
What's the difference between an inn and a bed and breakfast?
Oh, I have to look at the definition.
Live there, I think.
Oh, yeah, is that right?
John's ready to
Yeah, there's
answer you.
occupancy.
Price.
And
Price.
specific number of rooms you can qualify as an inn as opposed to a hotel. And then you can get some specific benefits from a building code perspective. But, yeah, the real difference is someone has to be associated with the property living there, which we have a very difficult time having lodging uses that actually are bona fide bed and breakfast. Most of our requests are for what would be considered like a VRBO, where it is not owner occupied at all.
Okay. Would anyone like to add these? Bed and breakfast.
That makes sense to me. They seem like,
So bed and breakfast by right, are there any objections to bed and breakfast by right for NC4?
I object to that. I think that we've had this discussion, and we've removed it from other areas, so I don't see why we would
We've
add
removed
this one separately. Yeah, we did it from, I think, R1. We removed it.
I mean, I would also object, I think, for me, my entire thought in this entire process has been how do we increase housing in this community? And I think the challenge I see with allowing bed and breakfast and inns is those are, you can take an existing housing unit and more easily turn that into one of those things, which is, sure, great for when you're selling the property. But in my mind, when you have competing commercial and residential offers on a home for sale, commercial's winning. And so I have been, I would be in favor of keeping this R2. I think that's clear. But if we are looking at NC4, we're looking at commercial uses, allowing things that would require some change to the property, I think that adds more of a cost to the commercial builder when they're looking to buy, and it kind of creates a balance between these homes being scooped up by commercial developers or by people that are, going to rent them out to tourists. I think it's easier for that commercial creep to happen along Carlisle that I personally would not want to see. And so, again, I totally respect the consensus of this planning commission, and, I can be the dissenting vote, but just me personally would be in favor of leaving it as is, with motel, of course, being the one special exception, just recognizing that those properties particularly would be challenging to convert to anything else if they were to be sold. And so I think motel makes sense to leave in there, because that way it allows, the current owner some flexibility when selling that. It'd be tough to sell those buildings and say you can't use them as a motel. So that's just my 2 cents.
Just to explain my rationalization about this, I'm in favor of bed and breakfast because that does have a residential use, is my understanding, whereas an inn does not. And I think some of those larger houses, it might be 2 retired people rattling around in it, but it'd be better for me if it was, 2 people running a bed and breakfast and also making some income from the property. So depending, I think they're difficult buildings to imagine what their future might be. So I'm not as interested in so much, but the other one I think would be considered, which would probably allow for more density in those structures, is the community residence halfway house. So I would also be in favor of including that by special exception.
I'm for the bed and breakfast by right, and I see it is not making much sense to not permit it there if we permit it by special exception in the R2. And I guess we can get into why we debated that and ended up with that in R2, but since that's listed there, a special exception in R2, I think NC4 makes sense for bed and breakfast. And I would add to Sarah, community residence halfway house by special exception. I guess I'd also go with inn by special exception too. John, bed and breakfast, community residence halfway house, inn. Include, not include in the NC4? Or Marty?
I'm okay with the majority of them. I still don't know about inn, and I'm curious what John thinks. But I think flexibility in uses is good. Those houses are really large. It's hard to find good uses for them, and I think those seem to fit.
What do you think, John?
In making this review, staff had previously recommended this area be NC1, and that was rejected because there was too many commercial uses. Just be cognizant, if we get too far so I'm looking at NC1, you have special exception for rooming house. Inns are permitted by right, community residence by special exception. If we're going through this, we may end up with a situation where we've just created another NC1 in name.
Yeah. And I would echo that.
While you're on this, you
Well,
were going to take
no,
motel out of R2.
Yeah, we have to stay focused. Motel is listed, it is listed as special exception in R2. That's something we missed.
Well, I think that's because up until now, these motel properties have been in R2, and so that's why we've kept it in. So I think
We were going to take it out as we made room for the NC4.
And that would probably may have been an oversight on my part, but we can, if everyone's in agreement, we can remove it.
So let's just deal with that, because the whole creation of NC4 came about because of this R2 issue, wasn't it? So we had recommended to remove motel as a use in R2 and to locate it in NC4. If anyone objects to that, let's hear that now. But that's my memory of that decision. Any objections? Okay, then let's go back to how we're debating, and given what John just reminded us about commercial encroachment in this district, does that change anyone's mind? Right now, I think it sounds like Marty and Sarah and I are interested in the B&B being by right in the NC4. And anyone want to join in that or reject that? Jenny and Nick already said
Yeah.
they weren't against it, so.
I do appreciate Sarah's comment that the bed and breakfast specifically designates residential. You need to live there to operate a bed and breakfast, and so I do appreciate that point, and it would allow for continued residential use. So I would personally change, with that in mind, I would be in support of specifically bed and breakfast being allowed,
Okay,
but keep my comments to the rest
okay,
being against,
okay.
if that's helpful.
So without objection, it sounds like we have a number, John, to recommend that B&B be added by right in NC4, and then at the same time remembering to remove motel from R2. The next item would.
Just want to make sure. So we did not want to include community residents?
That's what I was going to go to now,
Oh,
just to make
sorry.
it very
I thought you were
clear
doing
what
that.
we're doing,
Yeah.
sorry. Community residence halfway house, I believe I heard Sarah and I add that as included by right or special exception was your proposal, Sarah?
Maybe special exception?
Okay, special exception, community residence halfway house in the NC4, and I would agree with that as well. Jenny, Nick, John, Marty, anyone agree, disagree with adding that in to the NC4? Agree? Agree.
I'm
Jenny?
just reviewing the definition here.
Jenny?
By special exception,
Special
yeah.
exception, okay.
I mean, I think I'm okay with that consensus.
Okay, so we will add that one, John, special exception, community residence halfway house. The third one under lodging related to inn, I didn't hear the same enthusiasm for that, unless others want to add that in.
No.
Does anyone want to add in into NC4? Okay. Government facility. Is anyone interested in adding government facility to NC4 as it exists by special exception in the other NC zones?
Staff would just note that there are no plans by the municipality for any development on these specific parcels.
Okay, thank you. All right, then hearing nothing on that one, now we'll do the commercial uses. Convenience store.
Sorry, I got lost in my,
This is page 64.
thank you.
I'll just, I reminded myself, and so just for the public, we were, electronic cigarette and vaporizer store has been removed from convenience store. So those are two different things. So I was concerned about that, but convenience store does not equal vape store.
I would like to add convenience store by special exception. To me, it seems to make sense in that neighborhood, in that block. So that would be my
I can't remember if
opinion.
there's anything else that would describe that kind of, because sometimes there ends up, I think of one thing and there turns out there's another term for it. So that could be like a bodega, or that's what is there another term for that I'm missing? But convenience store, doesn't have to be a freestanding building like 7-Eleven. We're talking about, it would, because it's in the historic district, we're talking about some one of those buildings becoming a convenience store or of some sort.
So it would, as proposed, it would be a permitted use. What does that really mean? For those properties, it would depend. You could have a situation where you have, I would say something similar to, I've seen actually houses turned into convenience stores in Parkersburg, West Virginia. So it's something that can be done. It would look something like Pizza House, but it would sell all the accoutrements of a convenience store like 7-Eleven.
Or like Aville in Arntsville, what was the
Yeah.
Aville Inn is now more of a convenience store.
We also have the general commercial uses, which really cover the gamut of retail sales. So a convenience store and a bodega, very similar, a very limited line of groceries.
One thing that I think may be helpful for you to remember as you work your way through this is, when you're going through this, you're basically saying, this is what we believe should be here.
Yeah.
You're making an affirmative policy statement. This is what we believe these properties should be used for, not, well, yeah, maybe it should go there.
Well, I guess with the idea of a convenience store, I am resistant to the idea of having something like what our current 7-Eleven pop up on Carlisle Street. But I do like the idea of there being what I consider these neighborhood commercial businesses, like a convenience store, that would encourage someone to be able to walk down to their corner and get a gallon of milk rather than driving to Kenny's. So I don't know if I think it should be there, but I think it would be convenient for those neighborhoods for something to be, and they had that, what is the Campus Corner, which I think is mostly, which one? Mostly tobacco and like smoking products. So it's not really a convenience store in my mind anymore. So anyways, that's
So you
my take take on that.
Joining
I
in
think I'm
my
favor of-
interest in special exception. So are there others for affirmative or negative on special exception for convenience store in the NC4?
Not to be a pain, but to be a pain. My only concern would be, it looks like the definition of convenience store allows potential for fueling, which would be odd. Like if we go to the definition of convenience store in the zoning as it is right now, it says, shut it up. What we expect, any retail store with a wide mix of goods typically used daily, including household goods, prepared, made to order. Anyway, the use may or may not include automobile fueling service. So that I would potentially.
See, that's its own use, which is why I was
Right,
surprised.
I don't know if we want to just separately say, maybe take that last sentence out of convenience store, because we have
Gas
automobile
stations.
fueling as its own, or John, it looks like.
One thing is a special exception that would go into the determination by the zoning hearing board. Would say it would be, unless you want to put in specific language limiting it, I would not recommend getting rid of that provision as it relates to convenience store overall, maybe putting in direction for special exceptions that having, and the NC4 not having the drive-through or having the automobile fueling service.
Nick?
That's something we could do really easily, that's all I'm gonna say.
I guess I'm
To put it in the language for the special exception.
Yeah, just putting language into the ordinance saying that for special exception for that use in the
Oh,
NC4.
I see. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
And just so the public knows why we're doing this, and it seems like deja vu, is that we only created this NC4 district 2 meetings ago. And this was the last one that we will do this work on. But of course, it's crucial to finish it. So there are 3 votes then with the special exception for convenience store, but would like to hear if anyone really opposes this and would like us to hear why. Okay, then with that, John, I think there's only one other suggested one until we get to the colleges list, and that relates to long-term care facility by special exception. Can I look at this? Would anyone like to add that into the NC4? Okay. Then let's move to the other suggestions that I think were just heard in public comment earlier today. Please let me know, John, what you think of them before I even have to read them, since you were here too, and I think you got this document. This is the April 21st, 2005 letter from McNeese, Wallace, and Newrick.
So the drinking place causes me to have a little bit of a pause. But it's one of the things where the college has the ability to have that type of activity now. It's just something to be aware of, what happens for the next owner. I'd like to think that the college is going to own and operate these properties forever, but I mean, it's at some time, at some token, it may be beneficial to have clarification on if that specific aspect of the college's use would be beneficial for the residential community.
So you would be making that comment related to brew pub, drinking place, and microbrewery,
Yeah,
micro
the
distillery.
alcohol.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, and I note that we have, it sounds like, or correct me, but we've included these other uses in the NC4 that were brought to our attention. But I think I would agree with you on being more cautious about those 3. But what do other members believe?
I would agree. I think, again, our conversation around allowing for some commercial uses along Carlos Street was more for, was not intended for nightlife, right? Which you can go to a brewery during the day, but I think just the intention was kind of corner store, potentially getting some food, getting some coffee, right? Not a bar. And so I think for me, I would not recommend that we add those in there. I think Carlisle Street at night is relatively quiet, and I think I would say that the rest of these uses would contribute to it continuing to be quiet at night versus these additional uses would kind of give it a different vibe than what it is now.
What are other comments?
I agree with both Nick and with you, Charles.
Thank you, Jenny. Okay, then unless there's someone that wants to raise this, all right, then I think we're finished with the NC4. But please, those who have,
I did want to return to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just bring up, what do you, did you
I'm just gonna
have
carry
to, I guess, Adam's comment, you know, and in general maybe, I think when we first started this process, one of the goals was to reduce the number of districts that we have. And I just wanted your opinion, John, about whether or not creating a new district is a good or bad thing, whether or not we should be consolidating some of these that share similar uses, or if that's not really a hardship that we should have had as a goal in the first place. And the number of districts we have currently shown is not a concern for public understanding of our zoning ordinance.
So the first draft ordinance provided from the steering group, the emphasis was on housing. As such, the decisions of the zoning map, the draft map that were initially made, really brought that point home. A lot of R2, while we had these mixed-use districts, they were used sparingly. One thing that the Planning Commission and the evolution of this document in creating more districts hasn't made them confusing the way that they currently are. I think a good example are overlay districts. So I don't think it's necessarily a hindrance. It is something, though. It's getting away from what the steering committee had recommended, and it's something where the planning commission's going to have to be making the recommendation, just establishing that this is what they feel is that you feel is the best course of action for the ordinance.
Okay.
And to meet the and be in keeping with the comprehensive plan.
Thanks.
okay. John, seeing that we've moved from the NC4, do you want to return to what you were earlier describing and where there are questions open related before we get to the maps? Right before we did this, you had laid out a few items that had been unresolved, I thought, and I don't think we hit all of them, did we? No? Okay.
So updated district, okay, so yeah, the other one, I mean, it is with the maps, specifically the R2 district
Okay, do you want-
along
so- all right.
Middle Street.
So the options are now up for us to choose.
There we go. So the first map, well, maybe if I can find it. Sorry. Okay, so yes, we've provided 3 resolutions. Each resolution relates to a different map. Map option 1 is pretty much the existing or the most current draft version of the zoning ordinance map. It includes the NC4 district. Paxton Hall is included in that. It does not have any of the additional changes to West Middle Street. The second option is the more robust in that the entirety of West Middle becomes NC1, as this would include all of the clustered residential parcels. The third option is clustered along the existing commercial areas or parcels that have larger footprints. And here you have the church, Memorial Company, the Sites Realty, Ansi B, the bank, the podiatrist. Then there's a few other commercial activities. There are a few residential properties that are still within this cluster. They were included so that we would avoid the potential for spot zoning as it relates to, this one, making sure we're capturing all of the commercial. as such, I'm definitely looking for recommendation on which zoning map would be preferred. I believe there were some additional comments from Ms. Sipperly regarding Victor Street. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to make one comment, which is we are really working to move this, and we might do it now, but to recognize that we received it because of the busyness of life on Thursday, and so I don't know, we'll see here in a second, how many have had a chance to really do justice to researching this. I also want to just address one thing, John, and maybe you'd help with this for the community and for us up here. We've heard many times about the process beginning with the comp plan, and many of us on this planning commission were at the meetings related to the regional comp plan and supported it and then helped council pass it and things like that. And we therefore truly understand that residential has been a motivation of rezoning. And so it might be a surprise that we've made these decisions to add commercial into districts that the committee had given us as just residential. And I think the community owes an explanation for that. And I'll just say my personal explanation, as I've observed and thought through how this process has gone these last months, and it's been this, that I share in the commitment that Gettysburg needs more housing, and in particular more affordable housing. And yet I also recognize, after walking blocks of this town several times, after residents have come and said, but this structure is this old and this size, and these are the uses that seem to be more acceptable for it at this particular moment. And it was comments like that you have to take a look at the street. You have to come down and walk the block and recognize how these historical structures are occupying space. And those really changed my view as I walked around and got a better sense of it. Then when I first read the document from the committee, which was, of course, any place where we can make room for more residences, we should. And I hope that we've achieved something here. Council will decide whether we did or not, that kind of steps in and steps out of this, that permits as much residential as we can by also allowing for the commercial uses of those structures to take place. But I don't know, John, what you think of that as like, we tried to do some step in and step out of commercial / residential, and absolutely it's more mixed use than we got at the beginning of the process. I don't know if you have any, like, whether I said something wrong or you want to affirm anything I said, or do we just move on?
I mean, I don't have anything really to say about that. These are the maps. I believe we captured the comments from the last meeting to get the options for West Middle Street. Yeah.
Okay, so as we're deciding these maps, I just use that as context, but that's my personal observation on how we're still making decisions about residents and commercial in different districts. So does anyone on the commission have an option that you support versus another?
Don't think it's any surprise. I would be in favor of option 1, continuing to keep this entire stretch of road as R2. I mean, I walk or ride my bike along Middle Street, this part of Middle Street every day. I work at the college and I live on Ridge Avenue, and so I'm passing these properties daily. And I think, I understand there are a few commercial buildings in there that are truly commercial buildings. I think one thing to keep in mind with rezoning is we're never removing an existing use. Any commercial uses that are there now will continue to be allowed in those areas where we're not suggesting any changes to current use. My intentionality with this is that as properties become available to be sold in that neighborhood, they're sold for residential uses. And, I understand that's challenging for homeowners. I mean, I live in R1. I have a decently sized lot. It's beneficial to me to allow me to use that for commercial uses, right? I could sell my home to a business and make a lot more money than selling it as a single family home because of my lot size. But in my neighborhood, that doesn't make sense, and it's a residential neighborhood, and that's how I feel about the stretch of Middle Street as well. I think there are some commercial uses there, but they're more either very intentional things that you're not, like, the memorial, the headstone place. I mean, that's like, it's not like you're streaming in and out of there and there's lines out the door. You're there for a reason. There's a church there that, you're visiting for a reason. There's the Adams County Office of the Aging that, you're visiting for a reason. These are not things that I think of when we think of commercial districts in this town. Those aren't the type of commercial uses that we're thinking about. And so, in my opinion, keeping this residential, when parcels are sold in this, allowing them to be used for residential uses only would be beneficial to the community. I think, there's a lot of, red, pink, dark red, orange, light pink. There's a lot of commercial stretches of this town, and fewer, white and yellow, which are really our residential uses. And so this is a decent chunk of R2 of residential uses that would be now allowing for a lot more commercial uses. And my fear would be that, yes, it would allow, that wireless store. I don't know what it is anymore, but I mean, that could be used for something else, commercial, great. But it also would mean that if, any of those residences along Middle Street sold their house, that could be bought up by a commercial use. And again, my perspective is, commercial is going to win that bidding war in terms of who's offering the most for that parcel. And so, for all those reasons, I would be in favor of certainly option 1, but hopefully potentially as a consensus option. I think 3 is a little bit more, we cut it up a little bit, and we're still keeping some residential. So, I probably sound like a broken record, and I apologize, but I just wanted to put that out there for this meeting that, again, I'm in favor of keeping it as is.
No, this is really helpful, and thank you, Nick. And I do want to note, I think this is the third time that we've talked about this very topic and even added more visuals and are changing our minds because of the process evolving. So thank you, Nick. Others on this option 1, 2, or 3?
I also would rank option number 1 as my first choice. I realize I don't vote, but that's my input if it helps guide.
Thank you, Jenny.
Charles, I'm also for option number 1. I agree with Nick.
Okay, thank you, John.
I'm in favor of option number 3. I think it's a light-handed approach for including some commercial activities that would give current owners some flexibility there while preserving some of the R2.
Great, thank you, Marty. And I'll also share that I'm for option 3, and that means Sarah.
I think in line with my previous opinions about this, hopefully, is that I'm still in favor of option 1.
Okay. So it sounds like we're going back to option 1. Thank you, John. Thank you all. Now, what about Victor Street? You said something at the end of that.
I believe there was a comment related to Victor Street from Ms. Sipperly. Wasn't sure if the commission wanted to address that.
I didn't pick up that comment, so if others do, or...
I thought there was. I don't know if Ms. Sipperly's in the reason I bring
I'm pulling it up.
The reason why I bring that up, we did have the drafting changes and creating the new district may have changed something, so I'm not sure what the issue per se is.
So it's about the boundary lines for it.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you want, I don't think it's a matter maybe of controversy, but a matter of accuracy.
So saying we already voted for that area for Coster Avenue to be R1, and it's shown as NC1.
Okay, so this would be, that's something if we can have that changed relatively easily.
Okay.
If I understand correctly, it
was more about Coster than Victor, is that right? Because Victor was already, yeah.
Yes. So do make that change. I also, while we're just finishing these comments, we do not, it should just be noted that for uses in the R1 district, we do not have dwelling student housing as a permissible use. That's not an oversight. That's part of the discussion we had related to it. And if you could, John, just remind the room the lengthy discussion we had related to the definition of family and why we had it and how that relates to the R1, just so we can be certain of that answer.
Okay. probably the very end. I thought I had provided the staff report with this.
You did.
Okay. Well,
I think you did. I read it, so it must be in there somewhere.
for everyone not looking at the material, the change related to family was specifically about the prevalence of, or at least the concentration of housing, specifically around the college, that was being converted from traditional single-family residential to more intensive student housing. In doing that review, we wanted to make sure that we were not excluding any family types that may exist. That was about 6 months in this discussion. We settled upon, and I believe it's still the current definition. I do have to say it may change with regards to housing and urban development, but we utilized a definition to allow for language that is pretty wide with regards to how one defines a family. The exception being as it relates to individuals who are bona fide students. And the way we go about establishing those individuals, the college students, would be individuals who do not have residency associated with the place that they're living. And that comes down to simple things like not having car insurance that's actually a car registered in someone else's name or is in a different location. Having things like that, that in the event we were to do an investigation would clearly indicate that the individual is living in a concentration of individuals that are college students for economic purposes as opposed to being a housekeeping unit. That conversation was pretty long and that's very thorough, I would say.
So just to clarify, the first thing you said about the definition coming from HUD, even if HUD changes their definition, ours doesn't change. It's retained in our ordinance as ours.
That's correct.
Okay.
John, you gave me the definition a couple of weeks ago. Has that changed?
No.
Would you like to read it?
I'm pulling.
I haven't.
I'm pulling it up out here. Oh, well.
And I have it here too, but
Yeah, the term family includes, but is not limited to the following regardless of, well, let me pull it up on here. I'm sorry, Mike. All right. Well, we do.
Did we put it in the zoning ordinance? Oh, okay.
What does family mean to you, John?
Values. Indivisible, Fast and Furious.
About. Okay, term family includes but is not limited to the following, regardless of actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status, a single person who may be an elderly person, disabled person, near elderly person, or any other single person or a group of persons residing together. Such group includes, but is not limited to, a family with or without children, a child who is temporarily away from the home because of placement in a foster care is considered a member of the family, an elderly family, a near elderly family, a disabled family, a displaced family, or the remaining member of a tenant family. A household consisting exclusively of 2 or more full-time college students does not qualify as a family unless each individual in the household satisfies the following conditions, and the condition is the individual must have established a household separate from their parents or legal guardians for at least 1 year prior.
So the way I understand this, and this came up because there was some commentary related to it, and I think an exchange at public comment at the last meeting maybe, and so there's been some question about it, and I just want us to have clarity before we vote. And that is that the way I read this is that the first paragraph, which we got from HUD, is to make sure that there are no exclusions based on the way somebody creates a family within reason. Within a general idea of the way people live together as family, and to make that inclusive. But then the second was, to be honest, to be exclusive in this way only, which is that if more than 2 full-time college students are living together, that they would have had to have lived in a household separate from their parents for at least 1 year prior to having moved into this place in our borough together. Or I guess they could have lived in another place in the borough for at least 1 year with that being their primary residence. Is that correct?
Being in a household for a period of at least 1 year separate from their parents.
Okay. Yes, right. So they can't have moved here with their parents and then, yeah, so the separate household from their parents for 1 year, then they can be eligible to live with another college student in a house. And this came up because we had debated at length after listening to some residents in a particular residential district. And then from there, we thought about it more broadly and considered all the residential districts and made adjustments to all of them. But to be clear, and you can read the minutes, it started because we had this consideration and then went from there, and that kind of was almost like a domino of other parts of residential districts that we were looking at, which is why it took about 4 months to just deal with this particular thing and then the implications of this. And I wanted to close that today by making sure we're all clear about it. But here's the opportunity to find out if someone is still unclear about how this family definition works in R1 or anywhere else. Okay. John, back to you.
So at this point, we've discussed the updated district, the updated zoning map. We've provided at the beginning of the discussion the direction that council would like to see this a recommendation before them in their May workshop meeting. Given the changes this evening, there'd be quite a few conditions. We can definitely, I imagine that the solicitor would be okay with us finding a way to come up with a positive recommendation for a resolution. But it may be something where it would make sense to have a final review and approval of a completed document. Our preference.
I tend to agree with that, John, that it would be nice to say, this is what we're recommending. But with that said, I think there should be a recognition among the commission that if you're going to do that, that you should have a very, very brief discussion about this at your next meeting, because you will have effectively said tonight, this is what we want. And the only reason you're not enacting it tonight, or not, I shouldn't say enacting, you're recommending it, is so that staff can get a nice, clean document together, not one that's kind of spliced together with his handwritten notes based on the discussions you had over the last hour.
Thank you.
I
Sarah?
had a couple things I actually wanted to bring up or continue.
Please.
Because I felt like there were a couple things that Sue mentioned in her comments that I think we didn't get to.
Before you do that, can I just put some closure or clarity on what these two are suggesting to us? So it sounds like we are going to hear a little more comment tonight. I definitely appreciate what you're saying. I also know that this absolutely invites further opportunity for change. And it, to me, means that we could invite another round where at the end of that meeting, the question is, well, now you've made some more changes, should we extend another month? So how would you set up a situation in which we're not open for additional changes in the way we write the agenda? And
I think you would essentially rely on John to take what you have instructed him to do tonight, and then in advance of the next meeting, making sure that he's accurately captured what you discussed. That's what I'm envisioning.
Okay.
I mean, be mindful, you as a body are not enacting this.
Mm-hmm.
You're passing it along to council. And then they're going to have a whole lot more process with this. So I think the goal of the council is to have this portion of the enactment of this ordinance be completed. And they can do with it what they want. So, I mean, at some point, you have to say, this is what we're going to do.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, I would say that, in the time you have left in this meeting, that's probably your good opportunity if the goal is to have a recommended product before council at their May 27th workshop. I would say tonight's your night to flesh out what have you not addressed or what have you not revised that you would like to address. And then next month, you're essentially verifying that what you have instructed staff to do tonight has been achieved. That's
Thank
my
you.
thought.
Yeah, and believe me, the messages that that the council and administration of our community wants the planning commission to be over with this are loud and clear. Like, they couldn't be louder. We know exactly what we're being asked to do. I think I don't know if, I'm not going to speak with others, just want to make sure that when we sign our names on something that we're told by the municipal planning code that is our responsibility to do, which is to recommend a new zoning ordinance, that we can be certain that we actually do support it. And I was just wondering if there's a way that we can do that tonight, or if you think that we should see this clean copy and then how we navigate it. And it sounds like there are ways to do that, to see the.
I don't know how you can coherently recommend the enactment of a zoning ordinance that you probably made 20 to 30 revisions to in terms of uses.
Yeah, staff previously suggested, I'd recommend again, having a special meeting on May 5th just for this item.
It could be a themed meeting on Cinco de Mayo.
A little brevity.
All right, let's,
Laugh, John.
let's, if you don't mind, John, hold that for a second. And now that there's been a lot more explanation of what's ahead of us, Sarah, you had some comments that.
I just thought I was interested in returning to some comments that Sue had made in her submission about the revitalization district in comparison to Old Town, and that there were uses that should be included. And then this kind of returned to my other previous question about whether or not it makes sense to try to consolidate districts if they had similar goals. So I just was curious if anyone else was interested in discussing that point she made, that, her argument was that it didn't make sense that many of the uses are the same, but in some ways, the revitalization zone has fewer opportunities.
Thanks for raising that. Yeah, that's something we should revisit. Do you have a thought on it first?
I'm generally in line with her thinking that we should try to be fairly inclusive in things that are permitted in revitalization. And if it would make sense to just make revitalization Old Town, then that's something I would make sense to me also.
Okay. John, do you have a reaction?
I think staff has reiterated this a few times. The revitalization district is designed for whole-scale change to those properties. Having the limited uses, or the limitation is on those that are of a smaller, I guess you would say, scale of commercial activity. So like having a hotel as opposed to an inn, encouraging larger development on those larger parcels. That was the basis for the district. And in looking at the lot design standards, provided you can have a larger structure in the revitalization district as opposed to the Old Town district, a more modern design as opposed to the historic design.
It is true. John has shared those comments with us about what the concept of revitalization is for that district. Larger scale revitalization versus individual.
But as far as the design goes, it's all within the historic district, so it would have to meet HARB's recommendations or the design guidelines. Is that not?
It would, but the design guidelines are actually relatively flexible for new development. They encourage development that's basically not trying to be tacky and appear faux historic, trying to actually have distinct character in the built environment, and then also looking at, I think the term used is rhythm of the block. So when an Old Town historic architecture review board review would be envisioned, at least from my perspective, I imagine it would be a different review that they would be conducting. It's not to say they're not going to be doing a review based on the design standards. It's just that the block built environment of the revitalization district is inherently more open-ended than the Old Town.
What do you think, Sarah?
Well, it sounds like no one else is really.
Well, no,
I mean,
I'm getting off. I think it makes sense to keep them separate. I understand, John, I appreciate your comment between not allowing smaller uses, right? Like looking at the Agway property the college currently owns, just as an example, because the first one that came to my head, you know, if someone were to buy that property, they couldn't just make it a bed and breakfast. They would want them to make it a hotel, because we want these bigger projects to happen in that area. Additionally, I think, you know, height is a sore subject, and we had a great discussion about height, and I'm happy with where we landed, but I think that's certainly going to come up for the Borough Council, and I think that was an original intention of the revitalization district, was to allow some more height. And so I think divorcing that from Old Town made sense at that point, because, you know, there wasn't the intention to have that height in Old Town. So I think just guessing that height's going to be a conversation that the Borough Council is going to have, I think having that conversation about just revitalization versus if we can combine the two into Old Town, then it's going through separating them again into Old Town and revitalization, and then having a discussion about height. I think it just complicates the issue. I think revitalization gives us specific areas that we are looking at as a community to hopefully kind of increase the uses and make it better for the community. And so I think it makes sense to keep them as a separate district to allow for that conversation to happen without getting muddled into what are we saying for Old Town, you know, existing kind of thing. So I for all those reasons, I'm not opposed to combining, certainly, but that's in my mind why it makes sense to keep them separate districts.
No, I think we need to move forward, Sue, I'm sorry, just because I think we do have a sense of the revitalization controversy related to this. And so if you could wait to public comment, then we can. At the end of the meeting after you. Yeah, but we're not, it doesn't sound like we're having a vote. Well, it doesn't seem like we will, but we'll see in a second. Marty or John, on the topic of combining revitalization and Old Town. Yeah, so I really want to be more enthusiastic about revitalization and dig in here, but I do think that it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot to gather about what could create greater incentives to revitalize. I was reviewing this district in different moments during the process where we tried to ask questions about it, and it just never came. And that is, how do you incentivize revitalization if you're not as enthusiastic about higher height? What are the other potential ways to do that? And way back in November 2023, even before we saw the ordinance draft from the committee, when it was still in committee, the former planning director raised this question about height and incentives, and we said at that time, it's in the minutes, could Troy Truax, the consultant, give us some evidence or some thoughts or examples of how revitalization could work here if it's not all height? And we never received those, and we didn't get an answer really when we revisited this at a town hall with a consultant in September 2024, and then followed up in these meetings with some discussion about what is revitalization. So that's just a long answer of saying, like, I don't want to get more into this until that can be decided upon by the council about what's the full potential for revitalization in addition to height. Did you have, so it doesn't sound like there's enough that are interested in that.
That's fine.
Okay, you had some other comments?
One more matter I wanted to bring up, and I'm embarrassed to bring this up at this late stage in the ordinance, but I think we've even tonight have talked about the importance of housing and affordable housing, and for some reason it didn't occur to me until this most recent draft to just search for the term inclusionary. And so I did search for the term inclusionary, and there's a definition for inclusionary housing in the ordinance. But that's the only place I could find it was in the definition. I just wanted, you know, and I wish I had brought this up so much longer ago, but we didn't talk about, in my memory in this process, the idea of actually trying to require developers in certain circumstances to include affordable housing. Did we not?
I don't think we talked.
We didn't talk about it.
Well, yeah, in the process with the revitalization district, there was a provision at one point that for increased building height, before that was removed, there would be potentially one of the, or a requirement for extended building height would be to have a certain number of units set up for either voucher or affordable housing. I forget the exact language, but so that this is probably a relic from that earlier discussion. Yeah, I mean, as it is now, there are no inclusionary zoning practices in this document.
And I just want to ask if your opinion about this or what your experience is. Do you, I mean, I think of this maybe a term that's more often used in much larger urban areas, but do you think it would be appropriate in a small town like ours to say that even though there's maybe only a few opportunities that we can imagine for a townhouse development or something like that, that we would say 1/3 need to be for any, whether or not there's an incentive for height, any need to include, 1/3 of them have to be affordable?
Inclusionary zoning is a tricky concept. The results are mixed. Generally, the problem that the developer will bring up is that the cost for that affordable housing ends up being at a market rate for them to develop. So you end up having to jack up your other housing product costs, and you have a product then that is suboptimal for that can be suboptimal for individuals that would benefit from affordable housing, and that is overly expensive for individuals with market rate housing. That's something that can happen. Most of the programs that fail generally fail not necessarily because of the building aspect, it's when they have a fee associated, so you can pay. I think Montgomery County, Maryland does this. I know Frederick County did. They had you have a moderately priced dwelling unit program, and it's like you have to provide 15% of your units have to be at this price point for individuals of certain income levels. And then they'll have a provision where it's like, or instead of actually building that housing, you can pay us this fee.
Fee in
And
lieu,
yeah. And then what we end up with is a housing fee that doesn't actually have enough money to build housing and no affordable housing ever built. So that's something that also can happen when you have these programs that aren't necessarily targeted and direct. It's not to say it's a bad idea. It certainly is a beneficial idea to have mixing of income and avoiding the concentrations of poverty and all the negative social effects that can occur with that. The purpose of this ordinance as it is now, it's not something that would necessarily be practical. What if it would be something that the Planning Commission would want to examine, a full, robust inclusionary zoning program, that would be something that would probably be a good addendum or an amendment to the ordinance in the future, because that's something, if we want to have like a fully direct and targeted program. Because otherwise, yeah, as a part of a incentive program, it could be included with the catalog of other incentives available, but we don't, now without the revitalization district, we don't really have incentivized zoning. We just have regulatory zoning. This is what it is, you have to meet it.
So if that was to be included or something we looked at in the future, would the way that it would work is that it would be conditioned on, if any kind of proposal is a certain number of units, like above a certain number of units, then that's when that kind of kicks in as a requirement. Is that what we would be considering?
Yeah, there are many different programs and products and schemes that you can utilize. The problem we run into in the borough is we're not building housing, period. Since my tenure with the borough, I have not approved a single-family house, apartment, dwelling, anything. We may have 2 units come in for a subdivision land development that I could imagine would beat the Gettysburg Station project, but those are houses that are vacant that were knocked down. So in terms of physical housing building in the borough, where I'm sitting now, I don't see it as being something that would be practical, and it wouldn't necessarily fulfill anything. It would just be, we have a program that could have happened but never really will. So it's something we would have to investigate to see how we actually have a functional product or a functional process that ensures that development of affordable housing is occurring, as opposed to just having blank incentives.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So now let us return to the question of what's next. And I think I'll propose something and see what others think. Though I'm not that enthusiastic about scheduling an extra meeting, and especially when I think we've had quite an efficient set of meetings and open houses and whatnot. I think I will recommend it, just me, and see what the council says so that we can show extra concern for meeting a certain deadline. So I believe you said May 5th, and that's Tuesday at 7 p.m. And if I would recommend it be a special meeting with only one item on the agenda, which is this. Of course, it will have public comment on this at the beginning. Please know that. There will be public comment at the beginning of the meeting about this. And at the end of the meeting, anyone can address any public comment. But the only item on the agenda will be the rezoning, and it'll be a clean copy of it. So the kinds of comments, John, that before I make this recommendation and see what others think, I think it should be a vote that we take to schedule this extra meeting. So if there's a motion for it, that's what I'd ask for. But once that review is finished, can we say we're not, unless there's someone who wants to entertain a motion to amend, that we are voting to recommend the document in whole? And that is our one vote on the agenda. Unless someone comes with, I'd like to make a change, but we draft it in the language of a motion.
Mm-hmm.
Would that work?
I would have a motion on your agenda.
Right. And so if, as you receive the document from John Whitmore and you believe there is more to change, then the question would be, what do they do with it? They forward that motion individually to John, or... I'm trying to think through how this could be delayed again, and doing so, thinking about if a member did want to do something, what would they do?
Well, you're going to have your regular May meeting in addition to your special one, correct?
But isn't the workshop, when is the workshop?
The following Monday, or Tuesday with the Memorial Day holiday. So you'd be able to, assuming that something were to come up and we would have to do revised drafts, we would still have time.
Okay.
For a special meeting.
Okay, then I will say, if you have a revision to make, take note of it, address it at the May 5th meeting, and then the vote, if necessary, will also be able to be made at the May 19th meeting, but it could be made at the May 5th.
Well, and now that we have a zoning map, I will make the change tomorrow, so the zoning map will be updated on the website tomorrow. The text, we'll be able to get that updated probably by Thursday. So you'll have a week to look at it. If there are any additional materials or minor material changes, those can be brought to me, in which case we could have that before the May 5th, and we should be able to have a recommendation.
So that's my recommendation. Would someone want to make a motion to that effect?
I would just note, my presence is not critical, especially if it's kind of a up and down vote. I may not be able to make that. I have a series of zoning hearings that start next week, and depending on how many we have, one would be on the 5th, Monday the 5th, should we not get done with the hearings as scheduled the week of the 28th. Okay. So let's just put that out there.
John, how do you feel about not having our solicitor there on the 5th?
Life goes on without me. Yeah.
We should have all of the changes from tonight appeared to be relatively minor. We're talking about the land use table. So unless there's an item that someone would think would require the solicitor's review, I would recommend putting that in an email to the solicitor or myself prior to the meeting so that we could have an answer for you.
Like I said, I hope to be here, but there's a possibility I may not.
Okay. I think I'm a hopeful person, but I also live in reality, and I know that as soon as this is out there, that there are going to be comments, and even decisions we made tonight that might not have made someone happy or not. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily changes our votes or anything like that at all, but just so that we're aware that we're going to, we made changes today that people will react to probably.
Should we confirm that we'll have a quorum at that? I personally, I can make it. So.
Okay, so maybe instead of having a vote, do we need a vote to schedule the meeting?
If you're scheduling a meeting.
All right, would somebody want to make a motion, and then we can debate it, to have a meeting on May 5th at 7 p.m.?
I will move that we have a special planning commission meeting on May 5th at 7 PM in the Borough Council chambers to continue discussing our rezoning and potentially pass our recommendation.
Is there a second?
Well, second.
Okay, so Nick moved and Marty seconded a vote, a special meeting for the rezoning draft scheduled for May 5th at 7 PM in the council room. Any comments on availability or not? Okay, then all those in favor of having this meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I vote aye. Opposed? Okay, I think I heard that motion pass unanimously.
We'll need to advertise that meeting.
Thank you. Are there any other items related to rezoning? We had items 1 through 4. I believe now with that last vote, we have a plan for resolution with recommendation to council. But are there any additional comments related to rezoning from our planning director or anyone on the council commission? Chad?
I have a couple really quick things, typo type things. I'm going to email John with these. One's about the numbering on page 101, number 8's listed twice. One's about the footer. It's should say definitions, not supplemental regulations. We've got a question about, there's some weird language about the build to. It's not going to change the way that works at all. And the last is about the use of the word part versus chapter. It's just a typo correction. So I'm going to email those
Thank
couple
you,
of things. I
Chad.
just want to let you know there's going to be a couple of, there's probably going to be more of these as we go through with the council. There's going to be things as we're making changes and editing this and adding that. We're going to see some little typo things. But I don't really have anything of substance to add.
John?
Nope.
Anyone on? So I guess my last question for you is the county planning agency, when will they make their comments? After we make our recommendation, I imagine? Okay.
So once you establish a recommendation, that's when phase 3 will begin. And we have a public hearing that has a very unique advertising requirements. I believe it's a 45-day review. I'd have to go back to the MPC. But we will be sending it the very next day to Planning and Development Office at Adams County through their online portal. We've been pretty quick about getting responses from them. So then they're aware of our progress. We've got some interesting comments.
Great.
Just in general.
Good. All right, great. As far as announcement goes, I guess I'll add an announcement that our next Planning Commission meeting is a special meeting, May 5th at 7 PM on the rezoning effort. Our next business meeting, non-special.
But yeah, you're having a business meeting.
Okay.
Just to clarify, you're not having a workshop, you're having a special meeting.
Our next Planning Commission meeting is a business meeting on May 5th. And then there is yet another business meeting several weeks later on Monday, May 19th at 7 PM. Are there additional comments from any member of the Planning Commission? Just wanted to thank Nick again for chairing at the beginning of the meeting and apologize once again for being late. Is there any public comment?
Before we get there, just kind of a housekeeping matter. The structure of your meetings predates my attendance at them, but rezoning has obviously been a matter of public concern. Everything you do is a matter of public concern. As you move into your consideration of the Gettysburg Station project, I think you want to be mindful that while obviously public input is very important for that, it's fundamentally one person's application. It's one property owner's application. So I think you want to remind people of the benefits of speaking during public comment. And I'm not saying that in an effort to kind of constrict what people can opine on during that. But when you're on the clock, you want to have efficient meetings, and you want to make sure that you're covering your agenda items that you have to get through. You certainly were going to have ample public comment on that, I guarantee it. And there's a time on the agenda for that. But just in the interest of having things progress in an orderly fashion over those various meetings that you're going to have over several months, I suspect that the kind of the more free-flowing nature of your meetings originated at a time when the only people appearing out there were people who had business before you. And that is not going to be the case for these coming meetings for you. So.
Okay, thank you for that, Solicitor. Our public comment time is now open for anything on the agenda.
Or in general.
Please state your name and residence, and I will keep the 5-minute stopwatch.
Yes, sir. Sue Sipperly, 314 North Stratton, and I think this rezoning effort has been a different kind of animal in terms of public comment and the ability to discuss during the meeting, and I think people really appreciated that. So I think people understand that it was a different thing. And I just want to say that comment I made about the revitalization zone, if you're looking for higher density housing and things, it makes sense to maybe have a child care center able to be available, and it's not allowed, and then government facility is not allowed. And what if, I mean, some of these county offices that are moving out of town couldn't go in those big development areas. That was my thinking on that.
And thank you for sharing it, Sue. Other public comment? Please. Oh, I think Mr. Mel, okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead. I'll just sit here and wait.
Suzanne Castile, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, 131 South Washington. So the way I understand it, there's going to be a lot of ongoing discussion on this Gettysburg Station project. Is that correct? Well, one of my concerns is the transit station. You know, because, well, I'm not in favor of having to have it removed from where it is, but who's going to be responsible for paying for an additional facility and that type of thing? And if there's no restrooms available, I don't know what people are going to do if Mother Nature tells them they need a restroom. So, I mean, it's all things to think about. I don't like the idea of the transit station being moved for the project. I think it's in a good location where it is and, you know, very accessible to people.
Thank you for your comment.
Good evening. My name is Mike Malowicki, 2 West Broadway. First of all, I want to thank everybody on this commission for hanging in there and doing really tremendous work over a period of time. You certainly have more patience on this than I would have had, for sure. I have one small comment, and I'm going to send it over to John, and he can do with it what he wants, but it's the definition of a full-time student. I've been in this game a long time, and I know there are various ways of interpreting what a student is. So, John, I'll send that to you, and the commission can do with it whatever they want. And thank you again for your hard work. It's a marathon. This was a marathon for everybody. So, and work well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. Could you do it up there just so we can hear?
Is someone who doesn't live in this borough allowed to have a comment?
I see John Whitmore saying yes, so yes.
First time. Hi, I'm Alana, and I don't live here, but I work at 153 at SCAP, so Stratton, 153 Stratton. I don't know if this is relevant, but it was just concerning to me. I was surprised to see the waivers for landscaping. I was pleased that Mr. Jolin brought that up and said it was something that he's going to be really working with the developer, but things that were concerning to me is, does that mean there's no planting? As we all recognize, it is an ugly place right now, and so it's really weird to think about nothing like contributing to the aesthetics. And so just as someone who walks that stretch every day, I would love to see something that is like native pollinators, that is a pleasing aesthetic compromise, and that would be providing shade. It just was alarming to see that from that perspective. The second thing is I really appreciate Sarah bringing up the language about attainable housing. It is something that is extremely important to the at-home in Adams County process. It's something that's deeply concerning to me. To share at a later time, I can't afford to live in the borough at my current rate because of the increased housing costs, which is extremely alarming since I am born and raised here in Gettysburg. So it is something that is very applicable to me, and I'm in that weird zone where I am poor but not poor enough to qualify for protected housing. So that is something that I very much will want to see us having future conversations about. So thank you so much for all you do. I'm so glad I'm not on that board. So bye.
Thank you. It's really not that bad. It's actually fun.
That's great.
Any other public comment? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
I heard,
Second.
okay, I heard John move and Sarah seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, nay. And this meeting is adjourned at 9:26 PM. Thank you all very, very much for being here tonight.